Chill Hunt Music, Illustrations. This is Aurian Archive. Welcome back to Hybrid Theory. Round 2 of Why the Steam Deck might be the product you purchased this Christmas. I've taken the opportunity between not realizing that the stream was actually active that I was just working on to move back to my normal desktop and its much more comfortable chair than the little stool and side monitor sitting next to the television. Again, included in the details where if I had been thinking about it, I would have gone over it. I mentioned that I had scaling issues with the NVIDIA 1660 Ti, but I never don't think I really clarified what scaling issues meant. And what that meant is the card before that was in that particular system was a Radeon 7770. And the card before that was a 5770. And excuse me. Sorry, I've got an appointment with radiology in like an hour, and I'm really just kind of killing time until I've got to go see them. Okay. To bring you up to date, what I'm presently doing inside of City of Heroes is I'm going after the. Oh, I'm on a villain right now. That's why I'm not seeing the missions I'm looking for. I'm going after the badges that I need for accolades. And I'm pretty sure. Okay, Sucker Born every minute. We'll start here. And we'll check our difficulty level. Because it's me, nothing quite says like, uh-oh, like running into a +4x8 when you're level shifted down on something without a lot of PBAOEs. Okay. Where was I? That's always a good question. Where was I? Uh, the 1660 Ti, when compared to the cars I had before, the 7770, the 5770, before the 5770 was, I'd have to go look it up. Uh, I can't remember. I gave it to Ryeta. Uh, all of the cars I had had before, whenever I put them on a large format display, be it a large television screen or factory monitor, for a long while I ran a Westinghouse uh, industrial television as my primary gaming device because it was cheap. Yeah, I'm not exactly sure that I would uh, be proud of that today, but okay, whatever. It was a terrible display. Anyways, uh, but when I got the 1660, the first thing it did was it screwed up the dots per inch scaling on both Windows and Linux. Basically, it set the user interface so small at a driver and display processing level that the text was unreadable. The only way I got around it and uh, use that system on a regular basis is through the Steam Link, which uh, hooking the uh, hooking the computer up to a small 1080 monitor to the side, and then running the display to the TV for a home theater PC over Steam Link. I actually got the scaling to be correct for the resolution the system was actually running in this case 1080. And it was kind of a cheat and a hack, but that was how and why I went from calling it a media PC to a media server, because all I've ever really been able to use it for since the NVIDIA card went in there is as a server. As a sit down to use desktop system is just not good. And the experience has soured me so much. And it's not the first really bad. Everyone shouts hip hip hooray, NVIDIA's great, when then I actually get my hands on an NVIDIA card and use it in day to day and find myself going, what are you talking about? This is terrible. Document it. Driver proof. Okay. And this is why I try to stick to chill music while streaming, because I can rant very easily about the difference between the press view and the consumer view. The press view is, boo, NVIDIA's great. They send us free graphics cards that do give us high frames per second, and we'll just deal with everything else because we didn't shell out $1,000. Disgusting. All right. Coming back to the rant against the lack of available systems to buy, graphics cards or otherwise. And as I ranted before, that was because the CCP was, and again, this is not up for debate, this is not conjecture, this is statement of fact. The Chinese Communist Party was paying factories to sell to Bitcoin miners that the CCP was funding. One of these is a bribe, one of these is extortion, and one of these is fraud. Was using the CCP was using the calculatory control it was purchasing with the usage of calculatory graphics cards in order to maintain calculatory control of digital currencies in order to strip and refine, mine, or otherwise determine the metadata of transactions being placed through digital currencies. And yes, if you do have calculatory control of a digital currency, you can indeed piece together enough information about who made the transactions and unmask the identities of those who made the transactions. No, I'm not going to sit here and explain the math. Really don't want to. Okay, the point is, I'm soured on NVIDIA, and a lot of other gamers who are kind of in the same position have been just like me. They're not willing to pay a they're not willing to pay a Bitcoin miner for a used graphics card that's being thrown out the window because it's no longer performing up to expectation. By the same token, they can't buy a graphics card legitimately because of the number of graphic cards that are legitimately becoming available are being scooped up and sold to people who are willing to pay a price premium. And there have been a number of different emails revealed and conversations, and we've seen it before. The special edition, whatever, what was it, Gundam cards, GeForce cards that were sold by a retailer in mining rigs instead of being sold to end users as collector's items as they were intended to be. Yeah, that's not just limited to that one example. It's not. And that is Valve's big advantage with the Steam Deck, and that for the most part, gamers have not been able to realistically purchase for an effective cost a new computer or new computer components. All of the games coming out, they haven't been able to play because they can't get their hands on an Xbox. They can't get their hands on a PlayStation. Uh, Nintendo ducked and run from a Switch Pro, and there are various reasons, and I think all of them come back to that one company called Nvidia that's being a prat, but that's not unusual, and Nintendo really should have known better. But this also comes back to the secret genius of the Switch by taking and going back to the earlier point, Nintendo walked into the Koenigsegg dealership and got the Fiat sitting on the lot instead of one of the exotic cars. Well, because Nintendo went and got the Tigra X1, they got a system that barely passed Vulcan 1.0 certification. But they got a system that didn't have any of NVIDIA's usual bag of ancillary, tertiary, pointless add-ons that simply ran up power and added nothing else to the system. And I didn't have to deal with NVIDIA's driver shenanigans because all Nintendo needed was just a compiler capable of reading the Vulkan API, and that was it. There wasn't any place on the Switch for NVIDIA to be the Pratt like they were with the NV2A or like they were in any previous combination. And that brings us back to where we really are with the Steam Deck. There was a very good reason that Valve went with AMD. As I suggested in the earlier stream, or just outright stated, I don't think Dr. Lisa Su was entirely aware of the open corruption in facilities controlled by the Chinese Communist Party. I don't think Lisa Su was prepared to have vast swaths of AMD graphic cards getting pre-sold to miners for digital currency control instead of being shipped to retail channels. I'm pretty sure that the photos of Radeon cards being put on a pallet and shipped into mainland China instead of being put on a pallet and shipped to the EU or US was just as shocking to her as it was to everyone who looked at those photos and went, that's just a copy of the NVIDIA photo, is it? No, it's a new photo. It's the same people. It's still the CCP. It's still the communists. What did you expect? And that comes back to Valve's biggest strength here. Valve has put a tremendous amount of effort into controlling their own production facilities, where things are made, who makes the products. And Valve has a lot of experience in manufacturing their own highly sophisticated electronics between the Steam controller, the various Steam VR systems, the Steam Link. Valve's got a lot of experience in figuring out the backside of the channel structure, where they're going to get the components from, who's going to put them together, how can they retain control. And Valve has also taken another possibly monumentous step with the Steam Link. With the Steam Deck, in that the Steam Deck is an integrated GPU APU system. It is not a discrete graphics card, and its memory configuration, while complex, it's probably not a system that's going to be desirable from the point of view of someone trying to retain digital currency calculatory control. And again, the CCP has rapidly run out of a need between the crashing digital currencies, the fact that their targeted reason for having calculatory control to begin with, the identification of Chinese dissidents. Now that that reason is evaporating and the same calculatory control can be established with commodity ARM hardware that is massively less expensive to produce, doesn't require any knowledge from a patent holding investment interested outside party, in this case NVIDIA or AMD. And that opens up Valve with a unique opportunity. Because of the CCP's, the Chinese Communist Party's market abuses, there is an open market of people who really need to upgrade their older computers, which are likely still using Polaris or previous graphics, likely previous. We're probably looking at a lot of people who still have Radeon HDs and GeForce GTX or GTS previous branded cards because that's all they had. They weren't able to get a replacement. And at the very least, the Steam Deck, even at 1920 by 1080, 1080p, or 1080 60 frames per second, or even 1080p 60 frame per second 10-bit color, likely still will perform significantly better in real games with real effects than most of those older cards, even the super cards of yesteryears past, like my R929X. I'm not sure, but I think if the Steam Deck rocks out with 48 ROPS or uh, mm, I don't think they'll go for 64 ROPS on the back end. I don't think the back end will be that big, but I do think that there will be an effort to not hamstring with a certain party out of the picture. I don't think there'll be an active effort to hamstring the higher resolution performance. So I could see a 48 ROP or maybe even a 54. Or it may be that the system has been going to DisplayPort primary as the output. Maybe the underlying transmission tech has changed in such a manner that maybe they could get away with fewer ROPs. Again, just we'll have to wait and see how the dock performance, the 1080p's performance actually is on a standard gaming monitor. I'm personally thinking we're looking at something that will likely be close to an Xbox Series S in 1080p. Maybe a little less powerful, but probably in that ballpark. And that's not necessarily predicated on the mathematical flop performance, but predicated on how much of that is useful and how long the system has had to optimize. Again, there's just a lot of unknowns, and some of that is predicated on getting creative with how the system memory is set up, which I covered in the previous stream. And we could be looking at a very realistic situation where system memory or video memory could come from the SD card. I'm sorry, not the SD, could come from the solid state card, and all user data really has to go on the SD card, especially if you're on the 64 gig machine. All right, going back to, and before I ended the previous stream in a fit going, wait a second, is this even broadcasting? I brought up another particularly, uh, I don't want to say odd point, but I went down my normal rant on sudo is bad. Now, what I really don't know from the way Valve describes, we know that the Steam Deck is using KDE Plasma. We don't exactly know how Steam Deck is integrated into KDE Plasma, whether or not it's actually integrated as the windowing environment itself, whether or not it's actually it's replaces the standard Plasma desktop, and you can swap back and forth between the normal Plasma desktop and Steam, which would be a really creative and inventive way to go about lowering the power requirements over time instead of running both the Steam interface and the window manager, just running this window manager for at Steam as the window manager. I don't want to break out Inkscape and try to do any more diagrams. I mean, I know that my block diagrams can make most people lose their minds, so will try not to subject anyone to that again until I come up with a good reason to make people feel pain again. Hey, come on, I have a pain dominator or pain domination. Yeah, I know, bad joke. Well, is there anything such as a good pain dom? Yeah, that was a good res. Sorry, now we're going back to entirely bad inside jokes. No, I'm not looking forward to the radiology appointment. Okay, anyways, going back to, like with Nintendo, the setting of the Tegra X1 kind of put Nvidia on a sharp leash. Nintendo hasn't had to put up with the shenanigans that other vendors have simply because they didn't pick a hardware out of the box and hardware package out of the box that gave Nvidia room to be the complete prat Nvidia has been in the past. It's There was almost no custom modifications made to the Switch's Tegra X1. Most of the engineering work was in the hardware and the switching Joy Cons, and even then, I'm sometimes do wonder how much engineering actually went in there. But that by doing that with the Steam Deck, by having the beginning specs so low effectively, Valve's given room for incremental hardware upgrades. They've set the base performance for what an equivalent system needs to achieve. It needs to run Arch Linux. It needs to have a certain amount of memory performance. It needs to be able to run 1280 by 800 at 60 frames per second because it is a 60 hertz display. So we really are targeting 60 frames per second. Again, that comes back to, I think we're looking at a larger ROP backend just to better enable uh, running 60 frames per second. We could even get potentially creative with being able to split the CUs into a crossfire-like configuration and have each grouping of CUs work on a different set of frames. And that way you could get, if you have four CUs working on one frame and the next four CUs working on the other frame, and they're both using a separate frame buffer that's then mixed and then piped over two separate sets of ROPs out the back, you could get some interesting frame per second performance with a lower count, with a lower targeted internal calculation effort. So again, that's another potential strategy. I don't know that Valve's actually doing that, but with a quad channel memory system and uh, the memory space that we know about and the hardware that we know about and how it's configured without knowing how that backend is configured, I think any particular option is on the table. Uh, looking at a looking at a multi-GPU analysis, and the other reason why I think it may go for a multi-GPU configuration for processing is the power reduction, because it's an extension kind of the big dot little philosophy of having big cores and small cores that ramp up and down depending on processor load. If a if you are running in handheld mode and you can just run 30 frames per second on just half of the cores, and then all you have to do to go to 60 frames per second is just ramp up and start having a split processing schema, and that's built into Vulkan to do that kind of scheduling. That is part of the Vulkan specification. So it'll be interesting to see exactly what our performance figures look like. We've heard from the developers. They're all saying pixel per pixel, you get the same detail that the Xbox Series X is capable of at 4K, and that sounds pretty impressive. But we'll just have to see it in action. But this is getting away from where I see the Steam Deck going in the future. And this brings back to the original point I was talking about. The Steam Deck is, if anything, an anti-Steam machine. And this is one of those where I really, should bring up a browser window and do a side-by-side comparison rather than just talking about it. And what I should do and what I am going to do are going to differ greatly in this case because, well, really, if you're listening to this, you're probably got me set on and listening as audio background. What's actually happening on the screen isn't very important. Yeah, I'll pick on Dan Bongino for a second. He always says that his show is focused towards the audio first, so he spells things out and he says them out, rather than relying on the visual image that's actually occurring in front. And I really like that format, especially for a live stream. The downside of that is that having a sea full of information and swapping between windows and having a dedicated display when discussing a complex subject, it really, I mean, come on, you've listened to me by now. I go off on tangents very easily as various things pop into my head and go, I should probably talk about that now while I'm thinking about it. So let's talk about the thing that I'm thinking about right now, which is the alternatives to an AMD-powered Steam Deck. Valve set the requirements, it's hardware and software, the performance they want, the output they want, the power life they're looking at. Like Nintendo, they've set a minimum baseline. Any future product cannot perform worse than this. Any future product can perform better than this. And what that really matters and means over a longer point of view is, hang on, I'm checking a window here. Uh, I will go with that one. Sorry. Anyways, and this comes back to some of the other aspects of this and comparing the Steam Deck to the Steam machines. The Steam machines used a wide variety of processors and a wide variety of graphics. You could get Steam machines with AMD or NVIDIA components. You could get them with AMD or NVIDIA drivers. You could get them with AMD or Intel processors. And what that meant was, although Valve was still using a Linux as the base and Linux drivers, they weren't necessarily using open source software. Valve did not have full control with the Steam machines over the operating system because it was based on a hostile downstream from upstream Debian. It was based on Ubuntu, which was a mistake. And again, there's been other vendors who have started with Ubuntu and kind of gone, uh-oh, we blew it. Let's move to something else. And I have no qualm with Arch Linux. I think going to it does avoid the whole Debian dramedy completely. And that kind of is a reflection on Debian, that the Debian as an organization hasn't they have not done the job that would be expected of them to combat a hostile downstream. I think there's still some in Debian who imagine that Ubuntu's, not really the bad guys, even when they are. And okay, so we're oh, there's my badge. All right, I got the badge that I need. I've got like 30 minutes before I've got to roll out the door. So I will kind of keep on running this one. It's kind of going smoothly. Just something, little visual noise in the background I can almost easily just plow through. Okay. The advantage here, and it's the advantage that Nintendo holds over NVIDIA, is that any ARM processor vendor who can offer Vulkan 1.0 compliance, excuse me, I don't want to take the antihistamine into laughter, the radiology, but I may not have a choice. I'm sniffling. And no, I'm pretty sure that antihistamine wouldn't actually do anything to me for a radiology, but I'm supposed to be on like a 12-hour fast. No unexpected, nothing other than water, and that was it. So I'm, kind of expecting I'm going to get some kind of dye pumped into me. Yeah, not really looking forward to this. Okay. By setting the minimum performance level, Nintendo basically has NVIDIA over a barrel with the Switch. If NVIDIA is a jerk or a prat or just obnoxious about adding additional NVIDIA specific software or components, drivers or tools or whatever, Nintendo can just go, you know what? We're going to go get somebody else. And because our console is just Vulkan 1.0 compatible or compliant, we just need somebody who can provide us with a Vulkan compatible system in this form factor that could do the calculations to run our games fast enough to be playable, to reach that 30 frames per second. And there are a number of ARM vendors out there who can happily do that, who could have happily done that before the Tegra X1 was even used in the Switch. So Nintendo basically opened themselves up to options. NVIDIA either behaves or Nintendo finds somebody else, and, well, NVIDIA no longer gets sweet Switch profits. And then NVIDIA wants sweet Switch profits. Now, bringing that back to Valve and the Steam Deck. Unlike the Steam machines, there is a minimum level of performance on the Steam Deck. As a hardware device, Valve could introduce an ARM-based version because it is based on Linux. It's already using a translation layer, Proton, for Windows games. So adding a processor translation engine wouldn't be too much of a big problem. Valve also may have licensed RTNA 2 for their own designs. Again, we really don't know if this RDNA 2 design is internal to AMD or if it's like Qualcomm's RDNA 2 licensing that the superseding vendor, in this case, and Samsung licensing RDNA2, they can make whatever modifications they want to it. And since Samsung is employing the former Imagion developers who had long experience with Radeon hardware in the past and AMD toolkits, are very well equipped to figure out how RDNA2 works and maximize it for Samsung's phones. Likewise, Valve is employing, I'm pretty sure, a number of developers who are working on the AMD ATI open source drivers. So Valve is employing a number of developers who know exactly how to make RDNA2 work to its maximum effect. And that's the other core key component here, in that Valve is using open source software as the operating system. They're not necessarily bound to x86. They're using a graphics core that they may have licensed, and like Samsung, they're not necessarily bound to continue to use an x86 processing core in the future. So Valve could possibly take the RDNA2 cores used in the Steam Deck, slap them on an ARM processor, and call it a day. And between Proton and Steam running on Linux, all they would really have to do is just recompile the translation layer to new targets, and off they go. So Valve has opportunities and positional availability in front to launch new hardware whenever they want to, however they want to. They're not necessarily bound to the Steam Deck over and over. All right, so big question time. If Valve is actually already in a position to freely swap from x86 to ARM or any other processing architecture that they can build Proton on top of, why did they go with an x86 processor? Why go with AMD? Well, again, this brings back to Lisa Su is probably just as annoyed, angry as regular gamers at the difficulty in getting AMD products. AMD has had a direct buy store on their website, and while they finally have done enough to start offering graphics processors on a regular basis, central processors on a regular basis, they haven't really been offering graphics processors because there just are none in channel that they can get their hands on, even though it's their graphics processor. So the Steam Deck, because it's a unique product line made uniquely for Valve, shares nothing in common, is not a general purpose product, and is thus scheduled differently from other components, is actually available. And AMD has a big advantage here, the big advantage over NVIDIA. AMD has an open source strategy. They have an open source driver package. They have open source approaches for the processor itself. Scheduling the processor for maximum mobile efficiency with the kind of access that Valve has to how the hardware works, and being able to employ their own kernel developers or whatever to fix the code internally themselves without having to wait on AMD to assign an engineer to fix a problem that comes up, gives Valve a significant amount of leverage that they didn't have over the Steam machines. On the Steam machines, Valve had to, if there was a problem in the operating system, a problem in the software packages, a problem in the drivers, they really were stuck waiting on the vendor or the OEM to fix the problem. Or they'd have to, strike out on their own and do all the work themselves. Well, if they're going to do all the work themselves, what's the point of having an OEM in the picture? If you're going to be selling a gaming laptop and you partner with Acer, and then Acer never gets around to updating the drivers for their Predator with a Vega 56, and so you're using third-party hack drivers later on because Acer won't, do their job. What do you think the result's going to be? And That's kind of where we're at, is that with the hardware package that Valve has from AMD, from I am kind of having to defeat everything along the way here because Ace is an aggro hound, and he will attempt to fight everything anyways. So I might as well just go ahead and get it over with. And I need a drink again. Followed by Paul remembering, turn the mic off. No one wants to hear your water bottle. Maybe I should put it in a baby bottle just to freak some people out. That'd be fun. Uh, and it also gives Valve other options going forward. I mean, again, Valve and AMD, they're not really into the multi-GPU game. They're not really pressing anything like NVLink or GPU high-speed interconnects over particular connection systems. We're probably not going to see a dock that adds some extra processing power because there's not really uh, AMD's not really kind of into that product line. I mean, I think there are a couple of external AMD GPUs, but it's not a product focus of theirs. Although that would be interesting is if there is a protocol PCIe exchange over USB Type C, and that the Steam Deck can in fact take a more powerful graphics card plugged in through that dock. And that is something that I would rather have seen two USB Type C ports, but there may be an expense limitation factor simply because if you open that possibility up for an external GPU over USB Type C, another big thing where we really don't know yet is whether or not the Steam Deck supports USB-C display input. Uh, and the big question there really is, can you, if you have another device that's outputting an HDMI or DisplayPort signal, can you hook it up to the USB-C port on the Steam Deck and use the Steam Deck as a mobile display? I mean, that long has been the desired killer feature for tablets, and vendors still can't figure out how to make that work. But that's also why third-party monitor sellers are getting mileage out of mobile monitors. And okay, so let's bring it back to our our requirements. And yeah, that's what I thought. Uh, okay, we'll run like that. Okay, sorry, making a few adjustments. Yeah, no, I'm yawning. You know how it is. You got something, you're just dreading the worst. Maybe everything will just be fine. It'll be fine. Nothing to worry about. I'm not actually that sick. Yeah, the rest of my body goes like, hell you aren't. Alright. Let's try to get out of the dark space and keep focused on the Steam Deck. Keep focused on something that's not me. As hard as that is. It's like I'm looking at the clock and it's just counting down, counting down, counting down. Hmm. Where do I see the Steam Deck next year? Let's say it's on the basis of all the people who are pissed off at not being able to buy a graphics card, everyone who needs an affordable gaming computer, everyone who's ticked off at Nintendo for playing games with the Switch Pro, everyone who everyone who has a reason to be looking at the Steam Deck and going, you know what, we'll give that a try. It's priced right. it's less expensive than the scalper cards. I can actually get a product that will run the games I haven't been able to play and that I can take with me. So unlike the Switch Pro, or unlike the missing Switch Pro, it is here, it is available. What I see happening over the short term is that there's one other vendor who has a driver program, an open source driver program that is as effective and, as applicable as AMD's. And that's Intel. Intel has a pretty good open source driver base for their graphics cards. Intel really wants to be taking back market share from AMD. Intel really wants ZGPU to be a market success. So my prediction here is that probably by next year, maybe even before December even, maybe even this year, we'll probably see an Intel version of the Steam Deck featuring the ZGPU. And really, that's all I've got for right now without anything else up in front of me. I'll probably come back to this and be thinking about it later. I've now got less than 30 minutes to go to radiology, so I might as well just stop yapping and start driving. This is Aurian Archive. Hopefully I'll see you tomorrow.